The storm rolled in from the black hills like a warning, dragging thunder across the town's single street. Lanterns trembled on their hooks, and beneath the cottonwood outside the livery a rope swayed. At the end of it, a young woman stood on a crate with her hands bound, wind pulling her dark hair into her eyes. Someone had painted a sign and hung it around her neck, half blood. The word bit harder than the rope. Men gathered in coats damp with dust and pride. A few women watched from doorways, shame in their faces but silence on their tongues. The sheriff's hat brim hid his eyes as if the sky itself were guilty. Someone said she'd stolen a mare. Someone else hissed that her mother was Lakota and her father was nothing but a drifter, and shame like that had to be cut out before it spread. No one spoke her name. They never asked it. Down the street, a rancher dismounted in the wind. A tall man with rain on his beard and grief like an old scar he had learned to carry. He had come for salt, for nails, nothing more. A quiet errand to keep his house upright against the coming winter. Instead, he saw the rope, the crate, the way her toes pressed the wood like it were ice and she a drowning soul. He walked toward them while the sky cracked. The sheriff lifted a palm without force, a gesture that begged him not to trouble himself. The rancher didn't slow. He looked up at the woman and she at him, and in that breath she seemed less afraid than tired, less sinner than survivor. He saw it. Not guilt, but the long ache of a person made to live between fences. "This isn't law," he said, voice even, as if talking to a spooked colt. "This is hunger dressed up like justice." Thunder answered him. The men barked about purity and order and God's will. He stepped to the crate anyway. "She took a mare," someone spat. "Then I'll pay," he replied. "And if debt's still owed, I'll carry it." The sheriff shifted, conflict in his jaw. The rancher's hand went to his knife, not as a threat, but as a promise. The crowd surged with words sharper than steel. He cut the rope at the post, not the loop at her throat, careful and quick, catching the slack with both hands so the noose went loose but didn't bite. The crate slid, her knees buckled, and he held her like a man catching a falling stack of firewood he refused to let scatter. "She's mine," he said, softer than the rain, and the sentence shocked them more than thunder. Not ownership, but shelter declared in a land that confused the two. Mine to answer for, mine to feed, mine to keep alive. Someone moved to stop him. The rancher reached into his coat and dropped a leather purse at the sheriff's boots. "For the mare," he said. "For the rope. For your pride." The sheriff stared, torn between the town's heat and a thin line of real law he still carried somewhere under his ribs. At last he nudged the purse with his boot and let it be. The crowd hissed. The rancher wrapped his coat around the woman's shoulders. Her breath shook against him, the first sound she'd made. "Tell me your name," he whispered. She hesitated, eyes shining with a hurt too old for her years. "No one keeps it, so I learned to keep it quiet," she said. "But if you need to call me something, call me alive." "Alive it is," he answered, and lifted her into his saddle like she weighed nothing but winter's first snow. He swung up behind her and clicked to the horse. As they rode out, rocks of curses chased them, then the rain, then the open, God-sized silence of the plains where a person might yet be remade. Behind them, the cottonwood sighed. Ahead, the ranch lay lonely as a widower's hand. The wind smelled of sage and change. He didn't know if he had invited war to his door, only that he had chosen to stand between a rope and a human heart, and the half-blood girl. Wrapped in his coat, kept breathing, each breath a small rebellion the night had failed to steal. Morning came soft and cold, the kind that carried the scent of wet earth and pine. On the small ranch tucked between low hills, smoke rose thinly from the chimney. Inside, the woman stirred beneath a rough wool blanket, her throat raw, her wrists bandaged with torn linen. The walls creaked like tired bones, and a fire whispered in the stove. She blinked at the light, not yet believing she had survived the night. The rancher sat by the table, pouring hot water over grounds, his motion slow, quiet, careful. He looked up when she moved, as if afraid even his voice might break the fragile peace. "You're safe here," he said. "For now, that's enough." She watched him through strands of tangled hair, uncertain whether to trust the words. Men had spoken promises before, and most had come with chains hidden in kindness. She reached for the cup he slid across the table, her hands trembling. The steam smelled of bitter coffee and safety. He didn't ask her name again. He simply said, "I'm Calder," as if offering a piece of truth for trade. "The horse out back is Dawn. The hills beyond that fence belong to no one." Her voice was barely more than wind. "How long can I stay?" "Long as it takes for the bruises to fade," he said. Then after a pause, "Long as you need." Outside, the day stretched gray and empty. A hawk circled. The sound of distant hoofbeats echoed faintly. Maybe travelers, maybe trouble. Calder's eyes flicked toward the window, then back to her. "Town won't forget quick," he said. "They'll call it foolishness what I did." "You shouldn't have done it," she murmured. "They'll come for you too." "Maybe," he said. "But I've lived with ghosts worse than men." The wind pressed against the cabin walls like a restless spirit. She drew the blanket tighter. "They called me half-blood," she said quietly. "Like it was a sin. My mother was Lakota. My father rode with the army. I belonged to neither world, so both tried to bury me." Calder didn't look away. "Then they failed," he said. "You're still here." For the first time, she met his gaze fully. There was no pity in his eyes, only the steady calm of a man who had buried too many hopes to waste words. She found herself breathing easier. In the days that followed, she began to move again. She helped with the horses, fed the chickens, learned where the creek curved behind the barn. Calder worked from dawn to dusk, quiet as ever, but he'd sometimes leave bread cooling on the table or a shawl draped over the chair nearest the fire. She began to hum soft songs her mother once sang under the stars. One evening, as the sun bled over the hills, Calder stood by the fence, watching her gather kindling. "They'll come again," he said, not as warning, but as truth. She looked up, her face half lit by gold light. "And when they do?" "I'll stand where I did before," he said. "But this time you won't be hanging." Her lips trembled with something between fear and gratitude. "Why risk so much for someone you don't know?" He glanced toward the horizon, where the sky bruised itself purple. "Because once, someone didn't risk it for the woman I loved. She died waiting for help that never came. I swore I'd never turn away again." The silence after carried more than words ever could. That night, she dreamed of running horses and open skies. When she woke, the fire still burned. She pressed her palm against the warmth and whispered, "Thank you," though she wasn't sure if she meant it for the man, or for life itself for giving her another dawn. Outside, the coyotes cried, and somewhere beyond the ridge, the world turned toward storm again. For a few weeks, the wind quieted and the hills held their breath. The ranch became a world of its own, a fragile piece stitched together by small routines. Calder fixed the corral fence while she learned to saddle Dawn without flinching. Sometimes they spoke little. Sometimes the silence between them felt like understanding itself. But peace in the west never lasted long. Word spread across the valley like dust. The half-blood girl was alive, hiding with the rancher who'd defied the rope. By the time winter's first frost silvered the grass, anger had turned to purpose in the hearts of those who had stood beneath the cottonwood that night. One morning, Calder saw the cloud of riders long before the sound reached the house. 5 men, maybe 6, with the sheriff's star glinting among them. He stood on the porch, a rifle leaning easy in his arms. Behind him, the woman stopped chopping wood and looked toward the ridge. Her face went pale, but her eyes stayed calm. "They've come," she said. "They have," he answered. She set down the axe, slow and steady. "You should let me go. Maybe they'll spare you." "Don't waste breath," he said. "They don't want justice. They want a story that makes them feel righteous again." The riders halted at the gate. The sheriff raised a hand. "Morning, Calder. Got a matter to settle. We all saw you take what wasn't yours that night." Calder's tone was even. "She's no one's property, Sheriff. I paid what you asked." A thick man beside the sheriff spat into the dirt. "Coin don't wash blood clean." The woman stepped forward then, her hair loose in the wind. "My blood ain't dirty," she said, and her voice carried clear and strong. "You just fear what you don't understand." The sheriff's jaw tightened. "Girl, I'm here to bring you in for questioning. Folks want this done proper." "Proper? Calder's voice cut through the cold air. Hanging a woman without trial was proper too? The sheriff looked down, ashamed but cornered by his own people. You know how it is out here. Peace costs what it costs. Then I'll pay again, Calder said, and his hand brushed the rifle only once, a silent warning. But you'll not touch her. The tension crackled like gunpowder waiting on a spark. One of the men spat, muttering a curse. Another reached for his revolver. The woman's heart hammered, but she didn't move. Leave, Sheriff, Calder said quietly. There's nothing for you here but regret. For a long moment, no one moved. Then the sheriff tugged his reins, his voice low. You're making enemies you can't keep off forever, Calder. Then they'll find I don't scare easy, Calder replied. The men turned back down the trail, but the promise in their retreat was not peace. It was vengeance waiting for another day. When the sound of hooves faded, Calder lowered the rifle. The woman came beside him, her eyes wet but fierce. They'll burn this place, she whispered. They can burn what they see, he said, but not what's growing between us. She looked at him for a long time, the words catching somewhere between disbelief and hope. And what is growing, Calder? He met her gaze. Something worth fighting for. The wind picked up, carrying the smell of snow. They stood together on the porch, two souls against the whole frontier. The outcast and the man who refused to let the world tell him whom to love. And somewhere deep in the gray clouds above, the storm began to gather again. The winter night broke hard and sudden. Wind screamed across the plains like a living thing, and the ranch shuddered beneath its rage. The woman woke to the smell of smoke, faint at first, then thick enough to choke her breath. She ran to the door and saw it, the barn, ablaze in red and gold, flames clawing at the black sky. Calder! She cried, rushing barefoot into the snow. He was already there, hauling open the paddock gate, freeing the horses one by one as sparks rained down around him. The fire roared with a fury that felt deliberate, too clean to be accident. Someone had poured oil before the wind turned. Together they fought the blaze with buckets and soaked blankets, but the storm only fed it. The horses screamed, the air blistered, and in the chaos she saw tracks in the snow, boot prints, too many to count. Leading away toward the ridge, they came while we slept, she gasped. Calder's jaw clenched. The town kept its promise. They worked until the barn's frame collapsed in on itself, showering sparks like falling stars. By dawn, only smoke and ruin remained. Dawn. The horse limped near the fence, shaking from fear, but alive. Everything else, hay, tools, the winter stores, gone. The woman knelt beside the ashes, tears freezing on her cheeks. We can't stay, she said. They'll come again. I know, Calder said, his voice hoarse. But we can't run forever either. She looked at him, the firelight ghosting across his face. Why do you fight so hard for me? You could rebuild, live quiet again. He met her eyes. Because they took quiet from me long ago. They hanged my wife for something she never did. Said she was a thief. I learned too late what truth costs when no one stands for it. The words struck her like thunder. You lost her, she whispered. And I'll not lose you too, he said. She reached for his hand then, a small, trembling gesture, but one that felt heavier than any vow. The skin of his palm was rough and warm, and for the first time, she didn't flinch. Later that day, as the wind softened, she found him in the ruins, staring at the snow-melted ashes. My mother once told me, she said softly, fire doesn't only destroy, it clears the land for something new. He turned toward her, a faint light breaking through the grief in his eyes. Then maybe this land still has use. They spent the day salvaging what they could, charred boards, half-burnt feed sacks, the smallest pieces of what had been theirs. While they worked, she found something buried beneath the soot, a small silver locket, scorched but intact. When she opened it, there was a faded picture of a woman and a child. Who's this? She asked. He looked at it long before answering. My wife and daughter, he said. Both gone before the snows 2 years ago. She closed the locket gently and pressed it back into his palm. Then let them rest. You've already paid the price. That night, as the stars returned, the woman sat beside the dying embers and began to hum a tune, a soft Lakota lullaby her mother once sang. Calder listened, the sound easing something deep and bitter inside him. In the quiet between verses, he said, "We'll leave at first light, ride north through the pass, start again where no one knows our names." She nodded, though her gaze stayed on the horizon. "And if they follow? Then they'll find we've already built our fire too strong to put out." The wind shifted, carrying the scent of ashes and hope in equal measure. For the first time, she believed it might be true. Dawn crept over the charred valley like a shy ghost, pale light brushing over blackened timbers and the sleeping horses. The woman stood by the fence, wrapped in Calder's coat, watching breath rise from her lips. Behind her, the cabin door opened with a low groan. Calder stepped out, the silver locket resting against his chest. His eyes carried the weight of both loss and resolve. They had packed what little was left, a sack of dried beans, a rifle, a few blankets. The road north waited like an uncertain mercy, but neither of them moved yet. "We'll find peace," Calder said quietly. "Somewhere past these hills." She looked toward the horizon, the sky streaked with rose and gold. "Peace doesn't hide," she murmured. "We have to make it." Before he could answer, a sound rose from the ridge. The faint clatter of hooves, then voices carried on the wind. The town had come again. Maybe a dozen men led by the sheriff himself. Calder's hand went to the rifle. The woman laid her hand over his arm. "No," she said softly. "Not this time." They stood together as the riders approached, snow crunching under their boots. The sheriff dismounted first, his face drawn with something between regret and duty. "Calder," he said, "you know why we're here. Folks are afraid. They say she brought bad luck. The fire, the storms, the unrest. Folks are cowards hiding behind superstition," Calder replied. "And you're about to prove them right or wrong." The sheriff sighed, his voice low. "You saved her life once. Don't throw away your own now." Before Calder could speak, the woman stepped forward, shoulders straight despite the bruises of the past. "If it's me you want, I'll speak for myself." The men shifted uneasily. She faced them with calm fire. "You called me half-blood as if that meant less than human. You burned this land and still I live. Maybe that's what frightens you, that you can't kill what you fear." Silence hung heavy. The sheriff looked at her long, then nodded once. "You've got more courage than most men I know," he said quietly. "And I'm tired of burying innocents." He turned to the others. "This ends here. Anyone with a complaint can take it to the wind." Some grumbled, others spat, but none stepped forward. One by one, they turned their horses and rode back the way they came. Only the sheriff lingered a moment longer, meeting Calder's gaze. "Hey, take her north," he said. "Don't look back." When the riders vanished into the distance, the woman let out a breath she hadn't known she was holding. Her knees wavered, but Calder caught her before she fell. "It's over," he whispered. She looked up at him, tears bright in her eyes. "No, it's beginning." They rode north that afternoon, following the line of the river through valleys of gold grass and old pine. Each mile carried the smell of freedom, smoke fading behind them, sunlight ahead. By dusk, they reached a rise where the land opened wide, untouched by fences or hate. Calder stopped the horse, helping her down. They stood side by side, the wind cool and clean around them. "What now?" he asked. She smiled faintly. "We build again. Not from wood, from trust." He looked at her, the ghost of pain softening into something whole. "Then we'll start with that." She took his hand. "You gave me a name that night under the rope," she said. "Alive. I think I'll keep it." "Then so will I," he said. They stood together as the sun sank, two figures stitched against the endless sky. The rancher who chose compassion over fear, and the woman who taught him that redemption was not in forgetting the past, but in surviving it together. The wind carried their silence away, leaving only the steady rhythm of hearts that had found home at last.